On the 14th of February, you buy chocolates and flowers for the person you love. You are participating in a ritual dedicated to a man who was clubbed, stoned, and beheaded by the Roman Emperor Claudius II in the year 269. Nobody knows why. Not the Catholic Church, not historians. Not a single surviving document from the first 1,000 years of Christianity connects Valentine, whichever Valentine he actually was, because there were at least 3 of them, to romantic love. The connection between a beheaded Roman priest and the most commercially successful love holiday in the Western world was invented, as far as historians can tell, by Geoffrey Chaucer in a poem. In 1382, the saint came first. The meaning was added later, and Valentine is not the exception. Nicholas of Myra, the 4th century Turkish bishop who became Santa Claus, never gave gifts to children, never wore red, never lived anywhere near the North Pole, and the flying reindeer were added in 1823 by a poet who may have been drunk. Patrick never drove snakes out of Ireland. There were no snakes in Ireland to drive out. The island has been snake-free since the last ice age. George never killed a dragon. There are no dragons. George may not have even been to England. He was a Roman soldier from Cappadocia, modern Turkey, who was martyred for refusing to renounce his faith and somehow became the patron saint of a country he never visited. Every single one of these stories followed the same pattern. A real person, or sometimes a person of uncertain reality, died for their faith. The church recognized them as holy. And then, over centuries, their story absorbed the myths, the rituals, the dates, and sometimes the personalities of the pagan gods and local spirits they replaced. The saints did not eliminate paganism. They wore its clothes. And the story of how that happened tradition by tradition, saint by saint, is one of the most fascinating and least discussed stories in the history of religion. Before we get to the individual saints, we need to understand the system. The Catholic and Orthodox concept of sainthood rests on a specific theological claim that certain people, by the quality of their lives and deaths, now exist in a state of full union with God, and that from that position, they can intercede for the living. They are not worshipped. That distinction is theologically precise and genuinely important. The Latin distinction is between latria worship, reserved for God alone, and dulia veneration, the honor given to saints. Mary receives hyperdulia, a higher form of veneration than other saints, but still categorically below worship. This distinction is what Protestants have rejected since the Reformation. Martin Luther's argument: Scripture gives no basis for praying to saints. The dead cannot hear you. And even if they could, why would you approach God through an intermediary when Christ himself is the one mediator? The Catholic response: when you ask a friend to pray for you, you are doing the same thing. The saints are not dead in the relevant sense. They are more alive than the living, existing in the presence of God. Asking them to intercede is no different from asking a friend. This argument has never been fully resolved. It has divided Western Christianity for 500 years. But the theological debate about what saints are is separate from the historical question of how specific saints acquired their specific characteristics. And the historical answer is consistently surprising: the process of canonization. In the early church, saints were recognized by popular acclaim. A martyr died. The local community began venerating them. Their feast day was celebrated. Their relics were preserved. There was no central authority controlling this process. Saints emerged from the ground up from the communities that knew them or claimed to know them. This meant that the boundaries between Christian sainthood and local pre-Christian veneration were, in the early centuries, genuinely porous. A holy spring that pagans had visited for generations became associated with a local saint. A hilltop shrine to a local deity was rededicated to a martyr. The date of a pagan festival became a saint's feast day. Pope Gregory I, The same Gregory who revised the 7 deadly sins wrote a famous letter in 601 CE to Augustine of Canterbury, who was in the process of converting England. His advice about the existing pagan temples: do not destroy them, purify them with holy water, set relics in them. Let the people come to the same places they have always come to, but now to worship the true God. This was not corruption. It was strategy, and it worked. Valentine, 3 men, 1 holiday, 0 romance. There are at least 3 Saint Valentines in early Christian tradition. The first, a priest in Rome, martyred around 269 CE under Emperor Claudius II. The second, a bishop in Tournai, also martyred around the same period, possibly the same person as the first, possibly not. The third, a martyr in Roman Africa, about whom almost nothing is known. The Roman Church celebrated a feast day for Valentine on the 14th of February as early as the 4th century. But the earliest surviving records of this feast give no explanation of why this date was chosen or what Valentine did that was noteworthy beyond dying for his faith. The romantic connection does not appear until the medieval period. Geoffrey Chaucer's poem, Parliament of Fools, written around 1382, contains the line, "For this was on St. Valentine's Day, when every bird comes there to choose his mate." This is the first surviving connection between Valentine's Day and romantic love in any document, anywhere. Why did Chaucer make this connection? One theory: mid-February in England is when birds begin their mating season. The association between a February feast day and the beginning of animal courtship was natural enough for a poet to notice and exploit. Another theory: the 14th of February was close to the Roman festival of Lupercalia, celebrated on the 15th, a purification and fertility festival in which young men ran through the streets, striking women with strips of animal hide. To promote fertility, the Church had been trying to suppress Lupercalia for centuries. Replacing its approximate date with a saint's feast dedicated to a different kind of love was, potentially, deliberate. Whether or not the Lupercalia connection is historically precise, the pattern it represents is absolutely real. A pre-Christian celebration of fertility and new life in mid-February was absorbed into a Christian feast that acquired, over time, the romantic associations that the pagan festival had always carried. By the 15th century, poets across Europe were writing Valentine's poems. By the 18th century, handmade cards were being exchanged in England. By the 19th century, the greeting card industry had arrived and the commercialization was complete. The beheaded Roman priest became the patron of lovers. Nobody planned it. Nobody decided it. It simply accumulated layer by layer, century by century, until the original man was almost entirely invisible beneath the mythology. The Church, incidentally, removed Valentine from the general Roman calendar in 1969, citing insufficient historical evidence for his existence as described. He remains a saint. His feast day remains optional. The chocolates remained mandatory. Nicholas from Turkish bishop to Santa Claus. Nicholas of Myra is one of the most venerated saints in Christian history, patron of children, sailors, merchants, and the poor. He is celebrated in Catholic, Orthodox, and many Protestant traditions. His feast day is the 6th of December, and almost everything you know about him was added after his death. What we actually know: Nicholas was born around 270 CE in Patara, a city in what is now southern Turkey. He became Bishop of Myra, also in Turkey. He almost certainly attended the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. One legend, possibly with historical roots, describes him secretly providing dowries for 3 daughters of a poor man who could not afford to marry them off, throwing bags of gold through their window at night so they would not have to be sold into slavery. This is the origin of the gift-giving tradition. Not Christmas, not children specifically. 3 young women on the verge of poverty. How Nicholas became Santa Claus. After his death, Nicholas's veneration spread rapidly, first through the Eastern Church, then westward. His relics were brought to Bari, Italy, in 1087 CE, which became a major pilgrimage site. The Basilica di San Nicola in Bari still holds what are claimed to be his remains. Dutch settlers brought their tradition of Sinterklaas, Saint Nicholas, to America. Sinterklaas arrived by ship from Spain on the 5th of December, wore bishop's robes, carried a staff, and gave gifts to good children. In 1823, a poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, commonly attributed to Clement Clarke Moore, introduced the flying sleigh, the 8 reindeer, the chimney entrance, and the jolly fat man in a red suit. This was a literary invention, not a theological tradition. The red suit itself was not standardized until the 1930s, when Coca-Cola's advertising campaigns depicted Santa in their corporate colors. The 4th century Turkish bishop is now a global commercial icon, generated primarily by Dutch immigration patterns and a soft drink company's marketing department. The pagan layer. Beneath the Christian saint, historians have identified strong parallels with pre-Christian figures. The Norse god Odin rode an 8-legged horse across the sky during the winter solstice festival of Yule, delivering gifts and punishments. He was depicted as an old man with a long white beard. Children left their boots out filled with hay for Odin's horse, and Odin left gifts in return. Whether Nicholas absorbed Odin's mythology directly, or whether both traditions drew on common human instincts about gift-giving in winter, is debated. What is not debated is that the resulting figure flying through the winter sky, leaving gifts for children, draws from both streams simultaneously. Patrick the man who never drove out snakes. Patrick is one of the most celebrated saints in the world, patron saint of Ireland. Celebrated on the 17th of March with parades and green beer across every city with an Irish diaspora. He was British. Not Irish-British in the modern political sense, Roman British. Born in the late 4th century, probably in what is now Wales or Western England, to a family that was both Roman and Christian. At 16, he was kidnapped by Irish raiders and taken to Ireland as a slave. He spent 6 years herding animals alone, in the cold, on a hillside, and during that time, he later wrote, he prayed hundreds of times a day. His faith became the defining reality of his existence. He escaped, returned to Britain, eventually trained as a priest, and, in a move that was considered almost incomprehensibly brave by everyone who knew him, returned voluntarily to Ireland as a missionary. He spent the rest of his life there. He died there. He was buried there. The snakes. Ireland has no snakes. It has never had snakes in recorded human history. The island was separated from Britain before snake populations could migrate there after the last ice age. The story that Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland appears in medieval hagiographies, written lives of saints that were understood to be theological statements rather than historical records. The snakes are almost certainly allegorical. Serpents as a symbol of paganism, of the devil, of the old religion being driven out by Christianity. Patrick did drive something out of Ireland. He drove out paganism or began the process that eventually did. The serpents are that story, translated into memorable mythological shorthand, the shamrock. The story that Patrick used a 3-leafed shamrock to explain the Trinity to the Irish pagans appears in texts from around the 17th century, over 1,000 years after Patrick's death. It may be true. It may be the kind of pedagogical story that attached itself to a famous teacher over time. It cannot be verified. What is historically documented? Patrick's own writing. 2 texts survive that are genuinely, confidently attributed to him, his Confessio and his letter to Coroticus. They are among the most remarkable documents in early medieval Christianity, personal, urgent, self-aware, and written in deliberately simple Latin because Patrick knew his education had been interrupted by his captivity and he was not embarrassed about it. The real Patrick is far more interesting than the legend. He was a man who was taken from everything he knew, who found something in the silence that he could not abandon, and who chose to return to the place of his captivity out of love for the people who had enslaved him. That story needs no snakes. George the Dragon Slayer, who never went to England. St. George is the patron saint of England, Ethiopia, Georgia, Portugal, and Catalonia simultaneously, which should already tell you that his connection to any of these places is largely symbolic. He was born in Cappadocia, modern Turkey, around 280 CE. He served as a Roman soldier. When Emperor Diocletian launched his persecution of Christians in 303 CE, George refused to renounce his faith and was tortured and executed. That is approximately everything historically verifiable about George. The Dragon. The dragon story appears in its full form in the Golden Legend, a 13th century collection of saints' lives written by Jacobus de Voragine that was the medieval equivalent of a bestseller. It was one of the most widely read books in Europe for centuries and shaped popular understanding of the saints more than any other single text. In the Golden Legend's account, a dragon is terrorizing a city. The inhabitants have been feeding it sheep to keep it away from the gates. They have run out of sheep and have started feeding it their children, chosen by lottery. The king's daughter is chosen. George arrives, wounds the dragon with his lance, leads it back to the city on a leash using the princess's girdle, and offers to kill it if the city converts to Christianity. They do. He does. The dragon is almost certainly a visual and narrative shorthand for the same thing Patrick's serpents represent: the old religion, the chaos of paganism, the force that demands human sacrifice being defeated by the Christian knight. The story has no historical basis. George never went to England. The Crusaders encountered his legend in the Middle East and brought it back to Europe as a symbol of Christian military virtue. Edward III made him the patron saint of England in 1348. A Turkish Christian soldier who died in Palestine became the emblem of English national identity. History is rarely tidy. What the saints were actually doing. By now, a pattern is clear. Real people, or sometimes barely real people, die for their faith. The Church recognizes their holiness, and over the following centuries, something happens to their stories. Local needs attach themselves to the saint's biography. A coastal community needs a protector of sailors. Nicholas gets that attribute. A community with a pre-Christian spring festival needs a saint whose feast day can absorb it. A military culture needs a saint who can be depicted with a sword and a dragon. The saint becomes what the community needs them to be. This is not fraud, not in the way the word implies deliberate deception. It is the way religious traditions actually work, through accumulation, through organic growth, through the slow absorption of meaning from the surrounding culture. Christianity spread across the Roman Empire and then across Europe, not by destroying every local tradition it encountered, but by finding the places where local traditions and Christian theology could be made to speak to each other. The spring festival becomes Easter. The winter solstice celebration becomes Christmas. The local deity of a healing spring becomes the saint who protects the sick. The goddess of fertility becomes the Virgin Mother. Pope Gregory knew what he was doing when he told Augustine not to destroy the pagan temples. He understood that the human need for sacred place, sacred time, sacred figure, the need for the holy to be specific, local, touchable, does not disappear when a population converts. It redirects. The saints were the redirected form of needs that pre-Christian religion had served for millennia. The Protestant critique. This is precisely what the Reformation could not accept. Luther and Calvin saw the saint cult not as a successful redirection of human spiritual need, but as a failure of theological clarity. The saints had accumulated so much mythology, so much local religious baggage, so many quasi-divine attributes, that the distinction between veneration and worship had become in practice, invisible to ordinary people. Whether they were right about this is a question that Catholic and Protestant theologians still argue. But the history is not disputed. The saints were shaped by the world they entered as much as they shaped it. They did not defeat paganism. They became, in many cases, its continuation, under a different name, with a cross added, and the same human longing, redirected, continuing uninterrupted. A beheaded Roman priest became the patron of lovers. A Turkish bishop became a flying gift-giver in a red suit. A British slave became the patron saint of the country that enslaved him. A Roman soldier from Cappadocia became the emblem of English identity and the slayer of a dragon that never existed. None of these transformations were planned. All of them were necessary. Because here is what the history of the saints reveals about human beings. We cannot sustain abstract devotion indefinitely. We need the holy to have a face, a story, a date on the calendar, a place where it happened. Something that connects the infinite to the specific, the theological to the human, the eternal to the 14th of February. The theologians who built the saint system understood this. The reformers who tried to dismantle it discovered how deep the need went, because even in the most aggressively Protestant cultures, the longing for sacred figures did not disappear. It just found new vessels. The celebrity, the activist, the athlete who becomes a symbol of something larger than sport, the politician around whom a quasi-religious narrative of salvation or destruction is built. The need that the saints served has not gone away. It is as present as it has ever been. We just stopped calling the figures saints.